Hello, fellow teachers. This is Teaching with Power. And in this video, I'm going to give you a great way to teach the story of Peter's denial of the Savior in an effective and memorable way. Now, as you watch, if you feel this video is helping you, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button down below, which will cause the channel to grow and help other teachers just like you. This is Insight number 2 for the week of June 10th through the 16th in the Come Follow Me manual. And I usually make about 2 to 3 videos per week. Now, one of the things that I love about Peter is that he's so human. I can relate to him. And the poor guy. I mean, his mistakes and mishaps have been lovingly recorded for all of us to read throughout history. And it's one of those stories that all 4 gospel writers decide to include. But, Peter learns from his mistakes. And as you read the New Testament, you witness his transformation from fisherman to prophet. And the Peter of the book of Acts is quite a different Peter than the one that you find in the Gospels. He's changed. He grows. The gospel of Jesus Christ has changed him. And we get to watch that process. Now, this particular story is one of the best examples anywhere of how temptation works and how individuals can become trapped by it and the consequences of giving into it. So let's start out with our icebreaker. Hold out a fairly heavy weight plate, the kind that you use in a barbell set, and ask if there's anybody in the room who thinks that they're strong enough to lift it. But once they come to the front, give them a long stick or a pole and stick it through the hole in the middle of the weight plate, but only at the far end of the stick, and then ask them to lift it up. And they won't be able to. And there you say, see, you're not as strong as you thought you were. And they'll probably protest a little bit and say, that's not fair. You didn't tell me that I had to do it with a stick. To which you respond, that's right, the circumstances changed. Then thank them for volunteering and say, today we're going to take a look at somebody that discovered that they weren't as strong as they thought they were. And then you're going to get them into the scriptures by saying, in Matthew 26, verses 31 through 35, there was somebody who felt they were strong enough. Who was it? And what did they feel strong enough to do? And the answer they'll find, of course, is Peter, who feels strong enough to pledge that though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. And then be sure to point out Jesus' response to Peter, which is, verily I say unto thee, that this night, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. Jesus gives him a very specific and direct warning about a coming temptation. And wow, what a luxury. He's even going to give him the time frame in which he needs to watch out for this temptation. And here you ask, if you were Peter and you didn't want that prophecy to come true, what would have been the smartest thing for you to do? And they might give some different responses, but to me, the clear answer would be to run home, lock himself in his closet, and tell his wife not to let anybody talk to him until she heard the rooster crow that next morning. With that, he could have completely eliminated the possibility of denying Christ. Then say, instead of doing that, though, Peter does something very foolish. What foolish thing does Peter do in chapter 26, verses 57 through 58? And the answer? He goes to Caiaphas' palace. And then you could either ask or explain this yourself, but why would that be so foolish? Well, it's foolish because he's following the Savior into the den of his enemies. If ever there was a place where you might be tempted to deny that you know Jesus, that would be the place. He's putting himself in the worst possible environment for dealing with that particular temptation. And you may want to point out another reason why this is foolish for Peter, because if you remember in the garden at the arrest of Christ, Peter does something very foolish there too that would have augmented the danger of this situation. He cuts off the ear of one of the servants there while they're trying to arrest Jesus. Now, Jesus heals him, and by the way, that's a beautiful example of Jesus living his own teachings of loving your enemies and doing good to them that hate you. But the very people that were in the garden to arrest Jesus are going to be prowling around Caiaphas' palace. It's a terrible place for Peter to go. And to liken the scriptures, I would say, how do people nowadays make the same mistake as Peter? And I would hope that your listeners would come up with something like, people often think that they're strong enough to resist certain temptations. They believe that though other people may end up making certain mistakes or committing certain sins, they think, yet not I. I would never fall into that temptation. And then they go and put themselves into tempting circumstances and environments, where they often find out, to their dismay, that they were not as strong as they thought they were. And you could go even deeper by asking, Can you give me some examples of some modern-day Caiaphas palaces? And here are some that I can think of. Certain types of parties or clubs can be a Caiaphas palace for some. Certain people or friendships can be a Caiaphas palace. Sitting alone on a computer or a cell phone with unfiltered access to the internet can be a Caiaphas palace. Being alone with somebody that you're attracted to but not married to can be a Caiaphas palace. There can be many examples of Caiaphas palace in our lives, and the smartest thing for us to do would be to avoid these places at all costs, to stay away from them, to be careful not to think, oh, nothing would ever happen, I would never do that. And, the scriptures are replete with examples of people like this. If you had told David the day after he killed Goliath that one day he would commit adultery with a faithful servant's wife and then later have him killed, what would he say to you? Never, not me, not I. I would never do such a thing. If you had told Oliver Cowdery the day that he received the priesthood at the hands of John the Baptist that someday he would apostatize, what would he say? Not I, never. If you had told Solomon after the day he dedicated the temple that one day he would allow people to build altars for the sacrifice of children in his kingdom, what would he say to you? No, not I, never. The simple fact of the matter is that we may not be as strong as we think we are. So the only safe bet is to strive to stay away from places that we might be tempted. Teenagers are especially susceptible to this. They like to say things like, I can handle it, it's no big deal, I can go to this party, I can hang out with this group of friends, I can have a serious girlfriend or boyfriend, nothing's going to happen, don't you trust me? And I love the answer that my dad used to give me when I would say things like that. He'd say, no, I don't trust you. I don't trust myself in certain situations. Greater than you have fallen. Then here you tell them to keep their hand as a place marker in Matthew 26 and take them to John 18, saying, let's see how this took place. And then have somebody read verses 16 through 18 and 25 through 27. And here you see that each denial got a little harder to resist. First it was a young woman, then the servants of the high priest, and then it's the relative of the very guy whose ear Peter cut off in the garden. So you see, the circumstances changed. Peter never imagined or expected that he would be put under that kind of pressure. It just keeps mounting. Perhaps here's another lesson about temptation. The deeper we go into the environment of sin, the harder it is to resist. And let's be clear about one thing here. The gravity of this mistake is not as big as I think some make it out to be. Peter is not denying Christ. He's not denying his faith in him. He's not denying his loyalty to him. He's not denying his gospel. He's just denying that he knows him, which isn't good, but there's a big difference between denying Jesus and denying that you know Jesus. So keep that in mind as you teach this. Let's not overly condemn Peter in this mistake. However, this must have been a very difficult and distressing thing to Peter. Luke adds that at the moment the rooster crowed, that they must have been leading the Savior by, and Jesus and Peter make eye contact. And I wonder what that moment must have been like. And we can't know for sure about this, but I don't imagine the Savior looking at him with a condemning look, or an angry look, or even with a I told you so look. Just maybe a knowing yet still loving look of, Peter, I warned you about this. You shouldn't have come. Then take them back to Matthew 26, verse 75, and ask, what are the consequences of going to our Caiaphas palaces? What does Peter do in this verse? And he weeps bitterly. And here I would simply make the point that going to our Caiaphas palaces will often result in what I would call rooster crow moments. It's the moment that we realize the consequences and the magnitude of our decisions. It's the moment that you realize you're addicted and you can't stop a certain behavior. It's the moment you're caught in the act by somebody who trusted you. It's the moment you realize you've broken covenants and the hearts of those you made them to. It's the moment you find yourself so far off the path of discipleship that you wonder if you can ever make it back. It's the moment of regret, the moment of realization of lost blessings, relationships, and opportunities. It's the moment we're probably going to, like Peter, weep bitter tears. So here I would liken the scriptures by asking them, are there any Caiaphas palaces that you've been hanging out in or near lately? And what will you do to avoid them in the future? Then you could conclude with something like, I hope that you will never make Peter's mistake. Instead of thinking we're strong enough, we can be humble and recognize our vulnerability. Instead of going to Caiaphas' palace, we can do what Doctrine and Covenants 87:8 suggests. We can stand in holy places and be not moved. I hope that you never find yourself within the walls of a Caiaphas palace, weeping bitter tears. Well, a very important and powerful lesson for all of us to learn. I hope that's been helpful, and if it has, please like, subscribe, share it with others, and if you have any additional thoughts, questions, or feedback for me, then I encourage you to leave those in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Now go out and teach with power.